very dangerous to think that we know everything. I lost my darling husband, and then I was woken up in the middle of the night and saw him standing next to my bed.
Why is this important for us to understand?
That, to me, as a scientist, is very exciting, because what else are we capable of that we don't know about? I feel like in the modern world, we are quite disembodied.
I see this with athletes, really high-achieving, academics and scientists and business folks are not able to maximize that potential. As a neuroscientist, how do you think about some of these fixes?
What I've really learned recently is...
Okay, hold on. Dr. Tara Swart, the instant New York Times bestseller.
We all want to live the best life that we can. And I'm seeing a lot of loss of sense of purpose, lack of identity, can't trust yourself, but it's always about having the edge. How can I be better this year than I was last year? How can I be better next year than I am now? The biggest basis for that is neuroplasticity, which is that the brain grows and changes throughout life.
Yeah.
I think of the process as starting with... I usually say that's 50% of the battle.
Visualization is a tool that we learn in sports psychology. And how would you coach someone on how to use visualization?
The brain doesn't distinguish too much between what it's actually physically seen and what you imagine or visualize.
I do want to ask this, but I can't wait for you to hear my conversation with Dr. Tara Swart in this special edition of The Line, all the way from London. But before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the perfect time. It's quick, free, and lets you know whenever we release an episode. Now let's get into the conversation. Dr. Tara Swart, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here.
It's so lovely to be here with you.
I feel like you do not need an introduction. I think what you've done just for the field of neuroscience, frankly, in terms of expanding people's knowledge, and I think most importantly, making it accessible in ways that get people curious about the brain and about its possibilities. And you have built a cult following around some of these concepts that we're going to talk about today, manifestation and visualization and the idea of using intuition. And I really want to start with intuition. What does that mean to you?
Intuition to me means a deep sense of knowing. And I think that can come across differently for different people. Sometimes it's something that you know in your head. Sometimes it's something that you feel in your body. I feel like in the modern world, we are quite disembodied. And I'd be very interested to hear from you about that as well. So what I really passionately want people to understand is that intuition isn't just in your mind, it's also in your body. Previously, I've explained intuition as the fact that you can't remember everything you experience in your life, but you pick up life lessons through all the things that you experience. And so they are non-consciously held in your brain-body system. And there's a process called Hebbian learning, named after the neuroscientist Donald Hebb, which is basically neurons that fire together, wire together. So if we keep in our sort of outer cortex and working memory the things we need to know to function every day, then our intuition gets pushed deeper into the limbic system, which is about the size of your own clenched fist, and it's inside this outer cortex of the brain. And then also, as we get more and more life experience, it gets pushed into the brainstem, the spinal cord, and the gut neurons, which is perhaps the explanation for why it's sometimes called gut instinct. But what I've really learned recently is that there is something called the serotonin hypothesis for trauma. So trauma is the response to things that we've experienced that are bad. But I think of intuition as the response to things we've experienced that are, both good and bad, but not so extreme. So in the serotonin hypothesis, and so most people think serotonin is to do with mood, but actually at least 95% of our serotonin is produced outside of the central nervous system, primarily in the gut.
Yeah.
The word itself means serum, which is our blood products like blood and plasma, and tone. So this hypothesis says that when you experience an external traumatic incident, serotonin acts on your blood vessels to constrict or dilate them, which changes the amount of nutrients and oxygen that gets forced into the tissues. And this creates patterns in the musculature and the fascia. And so in trauma work, they say we hold bracing patterns, like, you've been clenched up. And so the other side of that coin is that hidden wisdom is also stored in your body.
I wonder, I think about this from an athlete's perspective, and I think, you hear all the time, play with your intuition. But how much is that intuition possible? Like, how do you make intuition possible? From my perspective, it's like you need so many repetitions in order to have the space to be intuitive. And maybe if you can disambiguate between intuition and kind of creativity and like maybe how they work together.
So in the source, I write about 6 ways of thinking, which are logical thinking, emotional thinking, physicality, what motivates you, and then intuition and creativity. So they're actually all interlinked.
Yeah.
And we all use all of them, maybe to lesser or, greater extents. And perhaps we recognize that, I would certainly say I have a strength in intuition. You would probably say you have a strength in physicality, but, we both are quite creative as well. And obviously very logical and scientific. So you can start to see how you build up that pattern of where on those 6 your kind of, strengths and development areas are. And so a lot of highly creative people have diagnosed mental illnesses. So if we think like Van Gogh or Alexander McQueen, Kurt Cobain, there's a lot of really famous creative people that had a lot of mental struggles.
Yeah.
And that's because there's some overlapping ways that the brain functions that appear in both of those. But if you have a low working memory, cognitive rigidity, which means you keep perseverating over the same kinds of thoughts and you can't kind of get out of that. And what's called low latent inhibition, which is that the filters of the brain are they let more through.
Yeah.
Then that can push you towards psychological crisis. But if you have a high working memory, cognitive flexibility, and low latent inhibition, then that can actually allow you to be more creative. So if you think about that filter around the brain being loosened, then to me, that does contribute both to being able to access your intuition and potentially being more creative.
I think for people who are kind of on the logical, analytical side, intuition and tapping into that feels almost scary. How do you think about like that bridge, and how do you kind of sell this idea of intuition to like a person who might kind of think of it as something that's not for them?
Yeah, so we were just discussing the fact that we've got in common, spending time, well, you live in Boston, I spend time there because I teach at MIT, that a lot of the people that come to the business school, the School of Management there, don't think they're intuitive or creative. A lot of the time it's because of the sort of schooling system from generations ago where you were you were either a scientist or a creative. And, I was certainly told I wasn't creative when I was at school. And in certain industries, particularly a lot, logic is put on a pedestal. And that even if something doesn't work out well, if you can give a logical explanation for the decisions that you took, you're not going to get fired. Whereas if you say, well, I just went with my gut on that one.
Right.
That's not going to, exactly.
That's not going to fly.
No. So sort of 11, 12 years ago when I started teaching at MIT, a lot of these logical business people would say, I'm obviously not going to make really important decisions like hire or fire based on anything but logic. And they tended to be the younger leaders. And it was interesting because the older leaders would be much more open to saying, I would use my wisdom and my intuition. And that's through those, like you said, those years of repeatedly seeing how that pans out.
Right.
And I think since we've had sophisticated scanning technologies and we can look at healthy and high functioning brains rather than brains in pathology, which was the only way that we knew how brains worked before, we can actually be more comfortable with things like intuition and emotions in the workplace and creativity. And I just want to add, because I do actually have to say this to my executive students at MIT, because they often don't think they're creative, that if you think creative is being artistic or being able to sing or play an instrument, then I can understand why you don't think you're creative. But actually, creativity is being able to see connections where they're not obvious to other people, being able to join the dots, being able to think outside of the box.
Right.
And that's when they all say, oh, well, if that's what creativity is, then I am.
Is that something you can train? Like, how do you set yourself up? Because it sounds like if you can tap into your intuition and kind of more consciously activate that, it can unlock a kind of a different level of functioning.
Well, I think it's important to say that the basis for that is neuroplasticity, which is that the brain grows and changes throughout life.
Yeah.
And again, before we had sophisticated scanning technologies, we thought that about the age of 18 or when you physically stop growing, that your brain reaches sort of like the end of what it's ever going to be, and that things like your IQ or your intuition or your creativity can't change. We genuinely believed that.
Yeah, which is wild. Right?
I know. And an important point, I think, to raise in terms of some, where we may go later in this conversation, that there were times that we thought that was absolutely true, and science has now disproven that. There are things we believe now that probably science will disprove, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. So as scientists, I know that we both agree that it's so important to stay open and curious and not think that you know everything.
Right.
So the thing about neuroplasticity is that if you think about a baby from 0 to 2, it goes from not being able to do anything for itself to being able to walk, talk up to 5 languages, if, talk correctly, control their own bladder and bowels, tell you when they're hungry, tell you when they're not hungry, understand things like when they're tired or not. And then in teenage, there's some pruning of the brain to make it more sophisticated. But this growth of the brain actively goes on till we're about 25, we can now see through scanning. And then from 25 onwards, if you married your childhood sweetheart and you've got a job for life and you enjoy it and it keeps your family safe and comfortable, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to learn and seek out new things and be curious and help your brain to grow and change, then you can equally do things to make that happen. And that's learning difficult things and seeking novelty.
Yeah.
And intuition is absolutely a thing that you can train like that.
How does this all connect to our senses? And I think I love how you talk about, okay, there's 5 senses that we're all kind of aware of, but there's actually 34 senses. Talk through what that means and why is this important for us to understand?
First of all, I think it's important because of what I just said, which is that it's very dangerous to think that we know everything.
Right.
And so this literature review that I did, to create this table of 34 senses, taught me some really interesting things. Like, for example, taste is subdivided into 5. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. But umami was only discovered in the 1980s. Does that mean we didn't have the ability to taste umami before? No. So there was something we were capable of that we just didn't know about. And that, to me, as a scientist, is very exciting because what else are we capable of that we don't know about? The latest sense to be added in, meeting the requirements, in physiology for being a sense was the immune system. We didn't consider that a sense before. The 2 that I've picked out in the signs to ask people to focus on in terms of really like healthy and positive aging outcomes are balance and olfaction.
Yeah. So
balance, because in the blue zones, the people who sit squatting on the floor or who have to climb inclines and, go up and down steep hills, even at the age of 98 and 99, they are less likely to fall and break a bone. And falls with broken bones are the highest causes of mortality and morbidity in the elderly.
Yeah.
And then with smell, there's something called olfactory enrichment, which means that you purposely smell as many different smells as you can during the day. They say if you acknowledge smelling 7 to 10 different smells, then you actually upregulate receptors in the nasal epithelium, which is at the top of your nose. And that shows a 226% increase in memory and cognition as we age.
So, okay, hold on. But you have to be intentionally taking that scent in.
But it's so easy. It's literally smell your coffee in the morning.
Yeah, yeah.
Have some like natural diffusers around your house. Like smell a flower when you walk past it on the street. Be very intentional about your bath and shower products. Right. So it's easy to do and a pillow spray and you're done.
And give me the stat again in terms of its improvement.
226% increase in memory and cognition as we age. But I'm like, okay, I wouldn't consider myself aging yet, but I'm going to start the olfactory enrichment already.
That's really fascinating. So, I mean, before you engage in learning, before you go to a class, this would be just like...
yeah, totally.
And how frequently do you have to do that in order to get that kind of return?
Oh, well, I do it every day.
Okay. Yeah. So just multiple times throughout the day to get that kind of return.
There's actually a machine that cycles you through 7 to 10 different smells overnight, but it's super expensive. So I just do it naturally.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
I came here to impress you with my stats, Kristen.
I'm impressed. Yes, we're barely getting started here. When we think about growing and learning and sensing and, just becoming like a fuller, more beautiful version of ourselves, right? Like all of these things seem important, right?
Yeah.
So how does Tara move in the world, right? Like, how do you think about these components?
The way I would think about it is that it's always about having the edge.
Yeah.
So and I think podcasts, particularly like this one, arm people with knowledge that they can use that can change their life.
Yeah.
So, my biggest competition is always with myself. How can I be better this year than I was last year? How can I be better next year than I am now?
Yeah.
And so I personally try to introduce 10 to 12 micro habits every year. I long ago gave up on New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
So, if this year it was smelling more things and appreciating nature and experiencing awe and really like acknowledging when I see something that's pretty or beautiful, saying it, thinking it, kind of savoring it. So for me, it's always like, what are a few small things I can do that are going to give me the edge over the person I was before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I guess I wonder how you think about this tension between really our mindlessness, in terms of how we operate in the world and how that's increasingly getting worse, right? When we think about our interaction with technology and our lack of interaction with just the world, certainly the natural world.
Yeah.
How do you think about this tension as a neuroscientist, right? Like,
yeah, I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
I actually did a TEDx talk in 2015, and I can't believe 10 years ago I knew what I spoke about in that TEDx talk. It was about technology and the future of humanity, and I thought, I know. I honestly
that just gave me goosebumps, that
please watch it after.
I absolutely will, yeah.
I talk about becoming a human AI hybrid, and I ask the question, will I still be me? Yeah. I don't know how I knew all that stuff 10 years ago, but I did.
So I've been intuition.
Yeah, exactly. So I have been thinking about this for a very, very long time. And I'm a scientist, so I'm a fan of technology.
Yeah.
And also it would be naive to say that there's any choice now, but that this is just going to accelerate, sort of, at an increasing
When you look
pace.
at the 30-year period of when the internet kind of began, and just like what that curve looks like, basically what's happened in the last 18 years in terms of internet usage has in the last, basically, we've surpassed it with AI in 3 years.
Yeah, I know.
Isn't that just like...
No. It's an exciting time to be alive as a scientist.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure as a parent how it could feel.
Yeah, it's hard being a parent.
Yeah.
I have 2 teenagers, so I see this in action.
But I trust us, I trust humanity, and my answer to this is that it's going to be more important than ever to be human and go back to those human, capabilities that we have, things like intuition and creativity.
It's what separates us from AI.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like our little advantage.
It's our it's our superpower. It's a massive advantage. So the question I really ask myself is, in a world where technology, let alone AI now, has allowed us to be more switched on and connected across time zones, across the planet, why are we feeling more lost, lonely, and disconnected than ever? And when I say, so I kind of look at that in 3 buckets, which is self, others, and then something greater, or like all things greater.
Yeah.
And with self, I'm seeing a lot of loss of sense of purpose, lack of identity, can't trust yourself, not accessing your intuition.
Yeah.
With others, we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of breakdown of relationships, both romantic, friendship and work relationships. We've also seen what I call low societal levels of oxytocin. So oxytocin is the hormone that bonds us all together. And when that becomes low in society, we see things like riots and wars, which we have been seeing.
Yeah.
And in terms of the something greater, if we keep it really practical and talk about the environment, that you've created here, or the ones that we create at home, nature, and just, the planet in general. But then, if we want to go there, there are obviously more esoteric subjects like God, the universe, source, whatever people call it. But in terms of nature, I've done a lot of research on ancient wisdom and ancient civilizations. And if we look at the first Americans, displacing them from their land, cutting them off from their natural plant and animal food sources, and the types of trees and rock formations that meant something to them, was a way to break them as people. And we've essentially done that to ourselves in the modern world by cutting ourselves off from nature. Yeah. So to me, a reconnection to nature is a massive, massive part of being able to thrive alongside AI.
Someone who studies circadian biology, I think about this all the time, and that I think one of the main issues with the lack of health, that's trending, in the world is this. We're not connected to these primal thresholds of nature in ways that, we haven't adapted to, we have not, and that comes at just such a cost. Well, I suppose we'll shift gears a little bit here. Maybe just, as we kind of round out intuition, just this notion of somatic awareness, if you want to talk about what that means for our brains, and what the connection there is. And perhaps athletes have a little bit of advantage here in that we kind of have to be able to feel our bodies. Like it's such an important aspect. But yeah, I guess just what's your take on somatic awareness and how do you think about that as a neuroscientist?
So I think what you're talking about there, pain is one extreme and it's quite negative, but I would just call it biofeedback, which is messages from your body. So obviously athletes are, much more honed in that skill than the average person. Although yogis would be very good at that too. So I think those are the two sort of categories where I say, if you're one of those two things, then you're probably already doing this. Most people, particularly in business anyway, are, like I said, very disembodied. It's like, you're getting paid to use your brain and your body's like the vehicle that moves your brain from meeting to meeting.
So just completely disconnected from your body, essentially. Yeah.
And probably quite dysregulated in their nervous systems as well. Or maybe we all are because, modern life is very stressful. So, a dysregulated nervous system, cut off from our bodies, disconnected, to our own sense of purpose, to others, to, something greater. And that something greater is really important because in the 5 regrets of the dying, the biggest difference that the palliative care nurse saw was that people who believed in something greater were not afraid of death. Yeah. So just going back to what you were saying about how do we cope in this age of AI, that is, another really key
when you look at the mental health data, individuals who have a spiritual practice that they return to consistently have way higher positive psychological functioning and are happier and live longer. So I think it's tapping exactly what you say.
You're totally my new best friend. I'm loving all this.
I know. Oh my God. I'll be your best friend. 1,000%.
Oh, thank you. So getting back in touch with our bodies is being in touch with nature is really important, but being back in touch with our bodies is really important. And it's simple. So the first thing I encounter with this is that people don't even really understand what that means. Yeah. So the first thing I say is, have you ever had a visceral reaction to something like, a shiver running down your spine at bad news, or butterflies in your stomach when you're excited, or, I just said to you, I just got goosebumps. And that's common language in my friendship group. But I think sometimes people have to be reminded that we feel things, emotional things with our bodies as well. And so if when you start to understand that, and just going back to what I was saying earlier about how intuition is held in your body as well as in your, mind or nervous system, then doing physical things can help us reconnect and access that intuition. And again, I always like to take things back to ancient wisdom. So if you think about it, in Paleolithic times, our ancestors did not have any spare resources for having fun. It was all about surviving, which is basically food, shelter, and reproduce. Yeah. And so why did they drum and dance and make cave paintings and adorn themselves? The answer to that can only be because there is some intrinsic value to survival of doing those things. And, to survive in those times, you had to be able to read the land. You had to be able to rely on your instincts, listen to your own body, live in cycle with nature. So I feel like everything that we've just been talking about all starts to fall together a little bit more, doesn't it? And then these are some statistics for you. Okay. It's like you gave me some gifts now. I'd like to give you one back. So we tend to think that the first evidence of humans creating art is cave paintings 40,000 years ago. But actually 10 and 20,000 years before that, people in southern Africa were making carvings into ostrich eggshells and making necklaces out of shells and wearing them. 50,000 years before that, people were finding things like ochre, that's like, crumbled colour that they could put onto their faces and bodies to make themselves more attractive. And there was a reproductive advantage in that because you were seen as more creative and more attractive and paying attention to detail.
Yeah.
And then 500,000 years ago, we made tools that were more beautiful and symmetrical than they had to be to complete their job.
Wow.
Beauty, like making things, beholding beauty. We think that a lot of it was to do with creating a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
But actually, in terms of the mental and physical health and longevity benefits of physical activity, there was clearly something to that. And quite a lot of it is also to do with vibration. But we think that instruments like didgeridoos, drumming, humming, have these physiological benefits.
The vagus nerve, which activates the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So there's this like inherently calming and soothing reaction, inside the system that is a counterbalance, to just the daily stressors. It's the fact that the people of that time were able to have any sort of energy left over to do any of these things is kind of mind-blowing, right? And I think speaks to your point, that this drive is coming from a place that is about survival. That also is part of survival.
Yeah.
When we consider modern society and we think about burnout and we think about all of these kind of psychopathologies, right, that exist and are so prominent, it is because we don't have this. We're losing the balance, actually.
Yeah.
And we're kind of prioritizing things that are more on the survival side.
And not on the thriving side.
Not on the thriving side. Yeah. Like that's how we like flourish, is the dancing and, the music and the connection. And we kind of touched on neuroplasticity, but I think it would be, really good to like just double click on it. I think it's come into the consciousness way more, but maybe just what is neuroplasticity and why is it important for people to be aware of?
Neuroplasticity being the ability of the brain to grow and change at any age. In terms of just practicalities for people who want to, bring a new learning or a new skill into their life, I think of the process as starting with raised awareness. So we've talked about being conscious of, the ways that you behave and you think and like what drives your behavior. Because if you don't know what it is that you want or what you're doing that's kind of not serving you, then there's not really anything you can do about it. So I usually say that's 50% of the battle.
Yep.
And then the next stage is focused attention. So I don't ask people to try and change anything straight away. I try to ask them to notice patterns. When do you, make that decision to go down a road that actually you no longer wish to? Or when do you miss an opportunity to behave in a different way? Once you've kind of really reinforced that in your mind, then it's the deliberate practice, which is now I choose to do this differently.
Yeah.
So you practice that also for a while. Neuroplasticity basically works through repetition and emotional intensity. But the main reason it fails is that it's just too difficult and we give up. So the fourth part is accountability. And that can be yourself, it can be a coach or a therapist, it can be your Whoop band, depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. The neurological mechanisms that underlie this are, first of all, myelination, which you'll be very familiar with. So when athletes repeat an exercise over and over again, some of their pathways get coated in this fatty substance called myelin, and that makes the electrical conductivity along those pathways much quicker. But there are reasons that we have slow and fast pathways. So, for example, if you, let's say, our ancestor put their hand in the fire, the reflex to snatch their hand out of the fire is a fast pathway, but pain is a slow pathway, because if you immediately got incapacitated by pain, you wouldn't be able to remove yourself from the threat. I'm going to use the analogy of learning a language. So that, let's say you already speak English and French, but you don't really use French that much. So it's in your brain, but you could polish it up, by using Duolingo or having French lessons, whichever. that's probably going to be myelination because you've already got pathways and synapses in there and you're just making yourself better at something that you can already do. If you were going to learn a completely new language, that would probably be most likely the second way of creating neuroplasticity, which is synaptic connections. So adult neurons that already exist connect with each other through synapses and create thicker and thicker pathways. So the thicker a pathway, the less energy it takes up your brain to use that pathway. So if you switched from speaking English to speaking French, then eventually French would be a thicker pathway than English in your brain. The one that happens the least in the adult brain is neurogenesis, which is embryonic neural cells growing into adult neurons and then, connecting up through synapses, maybe getting myelinated. In the hippocampus part of the brain, which is where we lay down memories, and obviously we do that throughout life, there is quite a high turnover of embryonic cells becoming adult neurons. You won't like this, but I love this statistic, which is that if you regularly do exercise, aerobic exercise, that contributes to this turnover of cells being like 15%. If you, like me, because of travel or whatever, like fall off of your exercise regime and just don't do it for a while, when you start again, that turnover of cells can actually go up to 30%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's my excuse.
Yeah. Well, I could see how it's kind of the newbie gains is what we call it. Like, where you're kind of restarting and getting, you make these gains fast. And I did not realize that. That's interesting, but that makes a lot of sense. In lots of professions, it requires reaction time. And in this clip really shows just the reaction time of a pitcher. And so I want you just to, in the context of myelination, and what's happening, I'd love to get you to react to it.
Okay. The distance from the rubber to home plate is 60 feet 6 inches. Subtracting 5 or 6 feet to account for the pitcher's stride, it takes a fastball traveling at 90 to 95 miles an hour about 400 milliseconds to get from the pitcher's hand to the catcher's mitt. The batter is already at a disadvantage because it takes the human brain around 80 to 100 milliseconds just to process the image that the eyes are taking in. On top of that, it's going to take 150 milliseconds on average to get his bat around to meet the ball, and 25 milliseconds for his brain to send the signal to his body to swing. That leaves him with just 125 milliseconds to gauge the pitch and decide whether or not to go for it. To put this in perspective, it takes 300 to 400 milliseconds just to blink.
Isn't that wild?
That's wild.
Like, so you think about, like, what is the type of training, to get to a place where you can gauge a pitch and be able to know what kind of swing, like how to execute that swing.
Yeah.
Just what's happening in the brain there is it's impressive,
I'm thinking of this research I saw that's called Game Intelligence, which was about the brains of footballers. And I'm talking about English, like soccer.
Yeah.
And how their ability to see like certain steps ahead is superior to the general population.
Yeah.
And so it came out with these very sensationalized headlines like UK football players are more intelligent than...
Yeah.
And I think in the first division, it's quite significant, actually.
Yeah. Part of becoming a great field hockey player, a great football player, is being able to see multiple passes ahead and be able to anticipate the play, right? Know based on the patterns, like, do I have to move left? Do I have to move right? Like, how do I intercept a pass or when do I retreat, So there is... I don't know that is necessarily correlated with intelligence, but that's just a function of being a good athlete, and you can be able to do all of those things, but maybe not score well on a standardized test, right? So did they actually test the intelligence of the football players and that stuff?
No, I think it was more things like spatial awareness. And,
right.
Yeah.
They would score very high, because you can't reach, a Premier League type of level without like being extraordinary in terms of your awareness.
But I think their IQs were actually high, but maybe they hadn't like completed higher education or certain levels of education. So I think it was just kind of trying to debunk this myth that unless you've done really well at school, high school and gone to university, that you're not intelligent.
Yeah.
And interestingly, these skills were massively enhanced by mindfulness meditation.
Yes.
So it's all about attention, isn't it? Attention, focus.
Definitely, yeah. Meditation traditionally is like a little bit harder for athletes. I'm not sure why. I know for me personally, it took me quite a long time to be able to kind of settle into a meditation practice.
Yeah.
But mindfulness, I think, can be an easier entry point, so it seems like it's more beneficial for athletes in particular. But
I'm sure it's beneficial for everyone. I mean, I think if there are some really basic takeaways, I think because I suddenly became aware that you and I speak a language that it's very easy for us to fall into. It's only you and I that are here now.
Yeah.
But, the things we've talked about, like smelling different scents, doing... So the easiest balance exercise. So when my husband passed away, obviously a lot of people came to visit me.
Yeah.
And I have a no shoes in the house policy. What I noticed was who had to sit down or like hold on to the wall to take their shoes on and off and who didn't.
Oh.
And it wasn't always age correlated.
Wow.
And it was either because the person did yoga or they did certain types of older person's personal training or whatever. Yeah. And I remember thinking, I'm going to make myself take my shoes on and off without holding on to anything to keep my balance good for as I age.
Yeah.
So it's just a small thing that people can do.
Yeah.
And then mindfulness, anyone can do it. And it's going to improve a lot of executive functions in their brain. So Yeah.
And maybe just say more about mindfulness, because I don't know that most folks probably don't have a regular practice with meditation or mindfulness. And they are very different, not that different, but they're different modalities, right? But what is the opportunity in terms of its impact on the brain?
I mean, I think it comes back to what we were saying about resetting the nervous system.
Yeah.
So, and I think so I used to do meditation. Until I heard this research from, I can't remember which university in New York, that said that basically if you take half an hour a day to do meditation, that means for 23 and a half hours a day, you're not doing meditation. And that completely changed my life, because at this point we were in the pandemic and I'm like, okay, wake up in the morning, first thing you do, meditation. First thing you do, breath work. First thing you do, journaling. And I was like, how many things am I supposed to be doing first thing in the morning?
I know.
And not stressing myself out.
I know.
And still making breakfast. So what I loved about that, because I was also very lucky, I was living in the countryside, surrounded by nature, and I work US hours, so I was able to have a really Zen morning and everything, is that I chose to start living my whole life like it's mindfulness.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a particular moment because I had this romantic idea that my husband and I would share our partner's desk and sit together all day whilst we were working. And as soon as my nails started hitting the
he was like, "You're driving
he was
crazy."
like, "Yeah, get out." Yeah. So then, I always say that the kitchen is the center of the home.
Yeah.
So I thought I'll sit at the kitchen table. But of course, the issue with that is that whoever walks past you doesn't think you're working.
Yeah.
So you're right in the middle of something and they'll just, And I remember once it was, my husband just started talking to me whilst I was typing on the laptop. And I remember kind of thinking, I'm really in the middle of writing this email or whatever it was. And then I thought, what's more important, Tara? Yeah. This email that you can come back to, or the fact that your husband wants to really talk to you about something? So I sort of went okay. And then, I turned my full attention to him and I was like, what is it that you want, darling? So I think giving your full attention to the people that you love that's a huge part of how I live my life. And in fact, Georgie, who we both love, she actually said to someone, when you sit with Tara, she never looks at her phone. She doesn't even have her phone on the table.
Yeah.
And to me, that should be normal, but it's not normal.
Yeah, it's not. No.
And the things I was saying to you earlier about noticing beauty, stopping if I see a flower or appreciating some impressive architecture, that's mindfulness.
Yeah.
For me, when I chop vegetables and cook, that's mindfulness.
Yeah.
And you can go walking in nature and that can be mindfulness. So I think, like you said, the barrier for some people is that they think they have to sit still, close their eyes, control their thoughts. Right. That's not what mindfulness is. Mindfulness
it's a way of being in the world.
Being present, being in the moment and, not worrying about the past, not worrying about the future. So I think really demystifying and simplifying what mindfulness is another huge gift that you're giving to listeners. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And Dr. Ellen Langer's work, on,
I know her.
Yeah. Mindlessness and mindfulness. And I spoke with her a few months ago and,
oh, cool.
And it was just, and she said something quite similar, but it actually made me really pay attention to how mindless I actually am, and it can be, and how easy it is to actually move through the world without noticing.
It's called habituation. I mean, it's almost like a survival mechanism because you can't possibly continually be stimulated by all the data that's being thrown at you.
Right.
But a couple of things, a question and also a point, is that when I was trying to teach people about mindfulness at MIT, it's a 2-day program. So I gave them an exercise to do, which was go home this evening and listen to your child for 5 minutes without looking at your phone or interrupting them. Men and women would come back and 100% of them would say to me, my child told me things they've never told me before. And I was just like, what does that tell you about how you're listening to your child?
Oh my gosh, that's
You've never done 5 minutes. I mean, and it's easy to do. You get home, you've got to make sure the children are doing their homework. You've got to start cooking. You've got, also prepare for the next day.
Yeah.
You can easily see how that happens, but it's shocking to actually acknowledge that makes that much difference.
Yeah.
And my question to you was, did you talk to Ellen about her counterclockwise experiment?
Yes.
Love that stuff.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
Just the power of how you think about yourself and and what you surround yourself with. Yeah. And very powerful. I feel like we have to talk about it now.
I know.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the study?
Well, let me say the minimum that I know. And if you've learned anything new from her, please tell me.
Yeah.
So there was this study where octogenarians, so people in their 80s, were placed into 3 groups. One group was the control group. So they just lived for a week, exactly the way they normally do. If they had glasses, they wore them. If they had walking sticks, they used them. And then another group were moved to homes that were made to look like their homes did 20 years ago. They were given newspapers from 20 years ago. They had photos of themselves in their 60s around the house. And when they got there, and, just remember, these are men and women in their 80s, and they were staying somewhere for a week, they asked for help with their suitcases to take them up the stairs. And the people said, no, you're 60 now, carry it yourself. Yeah. So it started straight away. Yeah. And if they didn't wear the same glasses 20 years ago, then they either had to have what they had before or no glasses. If they didn't have walking aids, they weren't allowed them for that week.
And then they also listened to music and watched TV from 20 years ago.
Okay.
Yes.
Amazing.
Which I thought, to the point about the senses, and activating. Yeah.
So, and then the third group just reminisced about being 20 years younger. So they stayed in their normal environment, but they thought about what it was like when they were 20 years younger. So the main group that lived in different homes, by the end of 1 week, were taller, stronger, had better mobility and better vision than they did a week ago. And, the taller is to do with posture. The mobility and the strength is literally mind over matter. And the vision is, if you think about how quickly after a certain age, people say, oh, I can't read really easily, so I'll wear reading glasses, and then your prescription's just going up every, few months. If you resist that, then actually, the body can adapt really well. Yeah. And on top of that, because that wasn't just subjective, people were shown pictures of them before the week started and after the week started, people who didn't know them, and rated most of them as younger a week later than they were a week before.
I mean, that is just...
I know.
And then the third group.
And the reminiscing group also had some benefits, but not as much as the active group.
You know that moment when you're in a hot tub, fully relaxed, then you know what's coming next. The cold plunge. Your body braces for it. That's contrast. And that's the whole point. That's where the Vigor Cold Plunge from our sponsor, Hot Springs Spas, come in. I use it alongside a hot tub to get the full benefits of contrast therapy, also known as hot and cold therapy. It's one of the most effective ways to boost circulation, reduce soreness, and support your nervous system. Heat opens up your blood vessels, cold tightens them. Alternating between the two creates a rhythm of stress and release that trains both your body and your mind to recover faster and respond better. The Vigor is their cold plunge model. It cools all the way down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius. Just 3 minutes can elevate your energy, sharpen your focus, and help your muscles bounce back. If you're ready to make contrast therapy part of your routine, head to hotspring.com/Kristen to learn more. A quick message from our sponsor, Whoop. Most of us want to live a long life, but what matters more is living that life well with energy, clarity, and strength. The feature HealthSpan on Whoop gives you a read of how your body's actually aging based on how you're living, not just your chronological age. By tracking 9 key metrics like sleep consistency, strength training minutes, time and heart rate zones, and VO2 max, it calculates your Whoop age. Then each week it shows you how your behaviors are influencing your pace of aging. So you get clear feedback on how to slow it down. Over 85% of people over 65 are managing at least one chronic condition, but your daily behaviors can shift that trajectory. We built HealthSpan alongside the Buck Institute, a global leader in aging science. So if you're interested and want to try HealthSpan for yourself, head over to join.whoop.com/science to get 1 month free. That's join.whoop.com/science. I think this is a great segue into manifestation and visualization. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
When we think about just that study in of itself, like how would you say manifestation and visualization relate to that study, and does it at all?
Let's start with visualization, because obviously in that study, there's a lot of visual cues.
Yes.
Of, what you look like, what you associate with a certain age of your life. But perhaps you could also expand upon, like, my best example that I have of what's called mental rehearsal is Lewis Howes telling me about when he trained for the decathlon.
Yeah.
And how, obviously, let's just say javelin, for example, he would go and throw that javelin, over and over and over again. But he said, on the way home, all evening, at night in bed, I was continually seeing myself throwing that javelin, the arc of it, like how high it would go, how kind of far it would go. And also like what my physical actions were to make that happen, where my eye was, etc. So, I know about mental rehearsal and visualization as a neuroscientist, because I know that the brain doesn't distinguish too much between what it's actually physically seen and what you imagine or visualize.
Right.
But hearing Lewis talk about it like that was really interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's, it's very common in sports. Sports, visualization is a tool that we learn in sports psychology, and you learn it as an athlete. And I think it's very N of one. It works super well for some folks. Mm-hmm. You can actually over visualize.
Really?
And mute your response.
Wow.
Your sympathetic response.
Love that.
So I think that I think more for the technical, like, imagining yourself on the foul line in a pressure situation. Mm-hmm. And those are moments where you actually want to be a little deactivated, right? So you can access that calm side of the nervous system as you're engaging in that very technical moment that's high stress, high stakes, so being able to incorporate your breath. But it's really interesting how visualization is quite complex, and there's so many different scenarios where it's very beneficial and others where it can be not so beneficial, and it can actually like mute arousal in ways that are not productive.
I love to hear this. I was just really trying to think about how that would pan out in my life, or the life of, just someone living their ordinary life. And I know for me that if I am nervous and I try to over prepare for something, I actually think I perform less well than if I just trust myself.
Same.
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's a sweet spot, and you kind of have to experiment, I think, to arrive at a place where you're like, all right, this is like the level of preparation that I need to feel comfortable, but still have that spontaneity and be able to connect and trust that I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. How I personally, my way of manifestation, which I would segue on from that, is that so mostly people have heard of vision boards.
Yeah.
And although I call them action boards, and I'll explain why in a minute, it's the same thing. So it's a collage where if people are starting out for the first time, I really encourage them to make them by hand. Of course, you can make them digitally as well.
Yeah.
Because then it's tactile and it's color and it's, sort of like 3D.
And you have to source the material.
Exactly.
And there's like a value in that.
And the thing about when you're sourcing material is that you might come across imagery that you hadn't thought of, but it appeals to you. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're searching digitally, you're only going to find the things you're searching for. Yeah. Because you'll specifically say, I want a baby or I want a house or whatever it is, and then you'll find those. But if you just leaf through magazines, then you might, something might just really appeal to you and you don't know why, but it could make sense later. Yeah. So the reason I call them vision boards is that I say you can't just create a fantasy and then sit at home and not do anything and wait for it to happen. You have to do the hard work as well, as obviously you know, as athletes. But the visualization aspect is interesting because, and some people can't visualize. So there's something called aphantasia where people literally cannot visualize. So let's say we both closed our eyes and I said, let's visualize an apple. I might see a crystal clear picture of an apple as if it's a photograph. You might see something that looks like a tennis ball, and some people would literally not be able to see anything.
Really?
So,
how common is that?
I actually don't know the percentage, but it's not uncommon because a lot of people comment on my Instagram and say, well, I can't visualize, so what should I do?
Wow.
The answer to which is imagine how you'd like your life to feel. Whether you can visualize or not, but obviously if you can't, then you've got something to actually look at. So what I ask people to do is to look at it daily, believe that everything on it is true, and give gratitude for that. So, you know, the visualization is helping your brain to not see it as something new and fearful. The belief system is building your confidence and your self-worth that these things can actually happen.
Yeah.
The gratitude is then moving you away from the cortisol sympathetic state to the oxytocin parasympathetic state, where you're much more likely to notice and grasp opportunities, take healthy risks. And, you know, if you can add in what would it feel like, you know, when this is real and around me in my life, then adding in all the modalities from your other senses can be really helpful too. If it's marriage, then, you know, actually proactively dating and making, you know, good choices, not the kind of bad boy choices or whatever. And if it's fertility, then taking the right vitamins and, you know, not sort of like, you know, indulging in unhealthy practices that might kind of compromise that. If it's in business, then, you know, whether it's networking or finding a way to, so for a lot of people, you know, in the last few years, it's been, I want to leave my job and have my own business or be freelance. So there could be all sorts of, I mean, my vision boards now, if you looked at my latest one, actually not my latest one is quite simple and obvious, but in the evolution of my vision boards, I got to a point where someone that didn't know me could look at it and they wouldn't know what it meant because it was very like symbolic rather than actually like these are the things that I want. Yeah.
Love that.
And I also really learned to leave space for magic because if it's very crammed, your life will feel crammed. If there's space, then not only do you feel like, okay, I can breathe, but also I started to realize that manifestation was so amazing that it shouldn't be limited by my own brain.
Yeah.
It should be open to things that I actually don't yet realize that I deserve. Like, for example, I honestly would not have put New York Times bestseller list on my vision board. I would have put Sunday Times bestseller list. So I like to leave it a bit open. Thank you. I like to leave it a bit open because I've just really learnt that all of us, you know, I think are a little bit afraid of wanting to ask for too much, but actually we may be capable of more than we're asking for. Yeah.
And do you think that puts a ceiling or a limit on how we operate day to day?
For sure.
Yeah. So this just opens up your possibilities. So if you were coaching someone who wanted to embark on this vision board exercise, what would be the steps? You know, how do you, I know when I think about my vision board and, again, like I kind of totally reject the idea of like, you know, New Year's resolutions, right? I think about, all right, like what are my standards? You know, how do I want to show up in the world? And I think about it from the standpoint of, all right, these are my values, right? If I know growth is a value, how do I see that manifesting, you know, and how am I going to live and action that value? So, you know, it's that's kind of how I think about it, but I'd love to hear kind of what would be that process, you know, if I were to kind of think about a vision board in a new way.
Yeah. So just to say, in the source, there's a chapter on the theory of how they work, but then there's a completely practical chapter on just how to make it. Yeah. So choose the size of like board or paper that you want. And then get a stack of magazines of different sort of things, you know, like home, travel, business, fitness.
I love that. So just magazines, just a bunch of magazines.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, have an idea of what you want. But like I said, also be open to being drawn to imagery for some reason.
Yeah.
So go through and find images of the things that you know you want. see if you come across an image. I prefer it to be fully visual, but sometimes people use phrases or numbers. If anything appeals, cut that out as well. And then like sort of lay everything out on the piece of paper. You can do it in sections. I tend to do sections, like a home section, a family section, a health section, a travel section, a business section. And even with that, I'll decide if I want them to be touching each other or not. So do I want to be working from home, in which case I would make work and home kind of next to each other. And I think very much about what's at the top, what's at the foundation, you know, what's on the left. So for example, before I met Robin, I had a large engagement ring on the top left, because you wear your engagement ring on your left hand and it's the same side as your heart. Yeah.
So you really wanted to find love?
I wanted to get married again. Yeah.
Wow.
And I've avoided it for a couple of years. I'd put sort of a tiny heart and then lots of travel and business. And that's when I thought, okay, I've manifested so much in my life, but I know I'm afraid of having my heart broken again. So I've not really put that out there. And that's not as like, okay, big engagement ring, top left corner.
Wow.
And that year, well, in February, I met him of 2016.
So it's literally just by putting that out there, you basically opened your heart.
Yeah.
Like intentionally.
Yeah.
And you attracted that in.
Yeah. So yeah. And what I ask people to do is just leave it arranged like how when you think you've got it right, leave it arranged like that, not stuck down yet. Sleep on it. Make sure there's no pets or kids or, you know, drafts around or whatever. Look at it again the next day. So your brain's had a bit of a chance to process what it's seen and whether it feels right or not. If you need to move anything. And, you know, even if you had an idea of like, oh yeah, I definitely want a puppy, but suddenly this picture looks wrong on your board, throw it away. You don't have to ask yourself why, you just have to trust yourself.
Yeah.
If there's something you didn't think you wanted, but you just find this image really attracting you, keep it on your board. And then when you're ready, glue it all down. Now, there's a smallish, but a significant percentage of people who never glue the images to their board. And I worked out what it is because I coached enough people, and it's that they don't believe they deserve it. So they do the exercise, but they won't take that final step of gluing it down.
Or is it they're afraid to commit to it?
Could be. I think they're kind of the same thing, actually.
Yeah, okay.
They come down. If you go underneath, it will be the same reason.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
So yeah, and then if it's okay with you, display it somewhere prominent so that you see it often, but also you're proud. You know, you're not ashamed for other people who come into your home to see that those are the things that you want. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just keep looking at it every day. Like I said, you know, visualize it being true, give gratitude for that, and just start ticking things off. You know, the smaller things happen quicker. Some things take more time. Some things sometimes, you know, leak into the following year. And that's okay.
I love how it feels you're not like overthinking it. Mm. That's the key. That's like probably one of the keys, right? Like you have to just really go with like your heart and your gut, like what feels right. You have to, because otherwise it works. So one of the sort of laws around it is that if you put things on it because all my friends are getting engaged, all my friends are getting married, all my friends are, you know, having babies, I should own a house at this age. If it's anything like that, the magnetic desire isn't going to be there for it to actually happen. Like it's got to be so aligned in your head, your heart and your gut that there's a pure path towards it, and that you will even endure having to wait a long time or obstacles along the way because you're so sure that this is what you want. I mean, I think of that famous image of someone digging for gold, and they've dug such a long tunnel and then they decide to give up, and we can see that the gold is just a few feet away. All right, so we're going to watch a clip of motorsport racer who's in the process of visualizing. So just want you to watch it and react to it. Okay. It's beautiful, huh? Wow. I know. Really leaning in. Yeah. And, you know, I think about these really high stakes, high stress kind of moments, right? And I think about a surgeon potentially or a military operator, or where it's like very highly technical. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of what I was saying a bit before around this idea that the nervous system, you know,
Yeah.
and being able to manipulate it in ways that allow you to perform under pressure and stress.
Okay, I'm thinking about, you know, the person that's listening to this
Yeah.
that may not necessarily be in the military or in,
Right,
you know, elite
right.
sports, but, you know, all our lives are important. We all want to live the best life that we can. And I think, actually, ironically, that it's with you, I'm going to bring this down to heart rate variability.
Yeah.
Which is that if we're both sat here and our hearts are beating at 60 beats, but yours is like a metronome every second, and mine's getting faster sometimes and going slower sometimes, then I'm more in that flow state where I can pivot if I need to.
You can respond and react.
Yes. When our HRV is low, then actually that really human ability to go with your instincts and be responsive may be blunted. And I love to hear that because, you know, I'm all about going with my instincts and trusting myself and sort of hearing that, you know, I sort of, it confirms for me that over preparing, like, you know, being too rigid cognitively, and even physically, it's actually not the best thing. And it really relates back to me about what we were talking about AI, like be more human.
Yeah. I love that connection. And I'd love for you to talk about the soul. What does that mean to you? Because you use that word.
Yeah, I did.
A lot.
I did. And, you know, I tried to say the mind, consciousness, the soul, psyche, spirit, because I'm really trying to make people feel included in this conversation in a way that's not alienating. I have had to reconsider everything that I thought about the soul because I lost my darling husband to leukemia 4 years ago. Thank you. I was brought up Hindu, so I was told about reincarnation and I accepted it as a child. But when you lose your husband, you question everything.
Yeah.
The only thing I can say is that even in the moment that he passed away, like a second later, I looked at his body and I just knew it wasn't him. I can't explain that as a scientist or even as a person or anything. I just absolutely knew that wasn't him. And that's why I didn't feel the need to be externally displaying a lot of emotion when he was cremated, because I just said to myself, I know the body in that coffin is not him. I didn't know what I thought at that point, but it started me on the quest of examining the nature of consciousness and whether, and I'm going to use that as an umbrella term for soul, spirit, you know, as a scientist, I'm going to use that term, how connected that is to the physical body. That's what I wanted to try to understand.
Yeah. And
I wanted to try to understand it because there are several models of how humans over the times have interpreted this connection between physical matter and our soul.
Yeah.
And materialism states that our thoughts, psyche, soul, spirit are only emergent from matter, physical matter, so neurons and synapses. Dualism would say that these things can exist separately from each other. I would have to believe in dualism to believe that my husband's soul is still somewhere.
Right.
And obviously my new book is called The Signs. So it is about receiving signs from lost loved ones or the universe, God, angels. But to be able to believe that and receive it, I had to convince myself of the science of dualism, question the nature of consciousness, look to the, you know, ancient cultures for what they believed.
Did you believe in a soul?
Did I?
Or your husband passed?
Well, yes, because I was brought up Hindu and I believed in reincarnation and souls and, you know, past lives. And so you don't question that as a child. So yes, I believed in it. I would say that I was spiritual, but not really religious. Okay. And because of my culture, it was more about souls and other planes than hell or heaven, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did want to ask this, and it's really for myself, to be honest. So it's a selfish question, I suppose, in that regard. You know, I think about science a lot. And it's one of those things that I think I resist. And I think a lot of people do because it's scary. And it makes us question ourselves in some ways. Or it can bring certainty, you know, and that's also scary. How would you advise someone to think about signs in their life?
Yeah, so I think I want to just reassure you that you're not being selfish, because you're asking that question for so many people. I had no idea when I wrote that book and first talked about it of how many thousands of people would contact me and my team with similar stories. And I think because I was quite open about saying people would think you're going in crazy if you tell them that you see signs. That resonated with so many people. And so what that means is this conversation's not being had because we're all afraid that someone will judge us for having it. But once someone, and obviously I'm in a very privileged position of having that scientific background and the respect from people that I do, that I said that, it just opened a floodgate.
Yeah.
And so the journey that I've been on with it is, well, for a start, I'd heard about people getting signs from lost loved ones. So of course I wanted that.
Yeah.
And I think I was trying too hard. My husband's name was Robin. I did see a lot of Robins, but that's not enough proof of anything.
Yeah.
I then had a no choice moment where I was woken up in the middle of the night, like absolutely like thumped on the shoulder, and saw him standing next to my bed. Now, I didn't ask for that. I didn't imagine that could happen, but it did. So of course that made me question things. And when that happened, I could sense how much effort it took for him to show himself to me. And it kind of convinced me, because he also taught me about unconditional love, and said that he wanted 30 more years with me, and sort of would write me cards saying things like, I thank God of every day that I met you, and I wish I'd met you 20 years earlier. And so, I felt very convinced that if it was possible for people who had been separated by death to somehow communicate with each other, that this was a very strong channel for that to potentially happen.
Yeah.
So then I did start asking for signs, and I did start sharing with close friends. And I was amazed by the fact that when I thought, okay, my friends are kind of have similar beliefs to me. So I started telling some of Robin's friends, who are very different, kind of old school army people. Everyone had a story of sensing a presence, or, electrical disturbances or white feathers. And it just really piqued my curiosity. So I kind of just gave myself to that. I mean, I was, my way of coping was, I think a lot of people thought I would throw myself into my work, because I can absolutely be a workaholic, but I knew I couldn't do that.
Yeah. So
I didn't work for many years.
Wow.
And I just went on this journey of like immersing myself in nature. I'm so lucky I've got so many friends around me. And asking Robin for signs, and trying, to make sense of this, doing the research into near-death experiences and terminal lucidity and neuroaesthetics and everything. And so how I've experienced it is that at first it brings comfort. Then, there are a lot of practical ramifications to becoming a widow. He gave me guidance. And now these signs just bring me joy. And I'm just so grateful that I've shared this story, and it's had such an impact on so many people, and that people feel validated that they can talk about their signs. I mean, I don't know if you want to or not. You say you resist it. I get that as a scientist, but have you received signs?
I have, over the years. It is really interesting. My mother, when I must have been maybe 4 or 5, but we were getting ready to go to Florida, and so everyone was waking up super early in the morning, and I didn't hear the story until years later, but and actually my father told me after my mother had passed, because I was asking, like I would feel like during the night, like I could, my mother always wore this like cardigan, and I could smell it, and I felt her hugging me, in my sleep, and I woke up and I like knew she was there, it was like that moment. But so I was telling my dad this, and then he told me the story of when our family was getting ready to go to Florida, and it was really early in the morning, and my mother rolled over to my father and tried to wake him up, and then when she rolled back, the figure that she had seen was gone, and she told my father, she described this figure, and he said, "That's my Uncle Lloyd." And he had passed away 30 years ago.
Got goosebumps.
I know. He had passed away when, my dad was just a small child.
Yeah.
But how she described him was, exactly how my father remembered him in the coffin, with this turquoise vest and this really heavy mustache and white hair and, down to the glasses.
Wow.
And so I have this in my head,
Yeah.
and my dad, and I was like, why was he there? What was he trying to say, and my dad's wasn't sure, what that sign was, but, and there's been other, moments over the course of my life where, I stopped as a child and then, randomly in a garden in Western Mass, and then another time in an airport, and then strangely after I was on Diary of a CEO, something about an aura, and I know. And so it's just strange, but it's one of those things where, you don't know how to think about these moments, and what they actually mean, if they mean anything,
But I love this for you, that you've had these experiences. And I genuinely believe that everyone can learn to hone that skill and make more sense of it. And so with my most skeptical friend, the conclusion that we came to in the end is where these signs come from, or, what else they might possibly be, doesn't matter. What matters is what they mean to you.
Yeah.
And how that helps you to live your life.
Yeah.
If it's a positive thing.
So just being brave enough to make sense of it.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. But also just to bring it back to grief as well. The ancient Greeks, when they buried their dead, would wail out loud and beat their chests. Now, this really made sense to me when I was doing the
vibration again.
Yeah. But also the somatic release.
Yeah.
Because I had amazing talking therapy, for my grief. But I only later realized that I had to, either get the massages or the craniosacral therapy or, return to yoga to actually release the trauma that was held in my body that no amount of talking therapy could reach.
Right.
Because, Bessel van der Kolk's work, the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
So he actually says that in PTSD, the Broca's area of the brain, which is kind of in here somewhere, which articulates speech, gets shut down.
Yeah.
And so traumatized people say, I'm speechless or dumbfounded, or I have no words. And his research shows that yoga is actually more effective than talking therapy or psychiatric drugs for treating a lot, depression and other mental health problems. And one of his stories that I really like is that there's a charity called Art to Ashes, where firefighters who go into really traumatic scenes, as soon as they exit the incident, they paint what they saw, and then they don't get PTSD.
Wow. It's kind of affect labeling, in some ways, just that idea of naming the emotion, naming the pain, kind of helps you process it more fully.
Yeah. Rather than suppressing it, which is, a lot of people are just suppressing a lot of stuff at the moment.
I feel like there's a lot of, I call them parasympathetic fixes, right? That keep us from these activities like affect labeling and, painting our pain or having a good cry. We reach for these fixes, just scrolling through Instagram or, going to the fridge and just eating our face off. How do you think about some of these fixes, that we build into our life to keep us from this pain? Is there a way for us to kind of overcome that?
Yeah, I think as a neuroscientist and a former psychiatrist.
Exactly. That's the dual. The bang bang. You're the perfect person to answer this.
I really, as you were speaking, felt like I want to say something that I think is really important for people to hear, which is that life is really hard and it's okay if you do some of those things.
Yeah.
It's only if it starts to have a really damaging effect on your life that, I have this model of sort of mental toughness and resilience. And I think resilience is being able to bounce back from adversity, but mental toughness is being able to prevent yourself from ever going across that line.
Yeah.
And I used the sort of psychiatric spectrum of motivation to addiction. So often where things end up in addiction, they've actually started off as being something that's good for you. Having a high work ethic is good.
Yeah.
But then becoming a workaholic is not. Yeah. I've been there as well.
I know.
Sometimes, enjoying a nice glass of wine with your friends at dinner is good.
Yeah.
Becoming an alcoholic is not good.
Right.
There's all sorts of examples of this.
Playing some video games is good, but doing it 8 and 9 hours a day is probably not good. Yeah.
Having a healthy sex life is good. Being addicted to porn, not, it's just everything's on a spectrum like that. And so do you know Andy Lowe at MIT?
No.
I've got such an academic crush on him.
Oh.
He's in the financial engineering department. His research is insane. He shows how that when you go too far over the line, it actually lights up the disgust pathways of the brain. So then it causes self-loathing. And, so that creates a whole vicious circle. What's also interesting is that unrequited love, so let's say you have a breakup or your partner dies or you're in love with someone that's not in love with you, that shows up on the same pathways as addiction, which is quite often why when after a breakup, people will turn to alcohol or drugs or gambling or, any of the things we've mentioned. So I think just understanding the neurochemistry of all of this and for people like us to be able to translate that for people is really, really important. And I'm saying that based on what I just said, which is that we're all human. We don't all understand this stuff. Even you and I that do understand this stuff can fall into some of those traps as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that the educational piece is really try to understand yourself more. Try to understand why you do the things that you do. Try to see or have good enough people around you that help you to see when something is no longer serving you.
Yeah.
And find an alternative to replace that thing, basically.
I think to your point, like, there's just the spectrum, right? And it's like, and it's, I think it's understanding and having the right kind of people around you to kind of keep you on a healthy path. Because I think what makes, people like yourself, like, these really high achieving, academics and scientists and, the business folks and the athletes, like, it's like part of what allows them to get to that level can become maladaptive really quickly, and turn into the end of the spectrum that now all of a sudden, like it's no longer adaptive. And now you're in a situation where you have to cope with that.
I mean, something I found really helpful for that actually was an exercise I learned when I did my coach training program, which is comes from the field of psychosynthesis.
Yeah.
So it's about the fact that each of us probably has about 6 sub-personalities that make up our personality. And there's usually a main one and then, some smaller ones. And they often can be quite, maybe like not necessarily opposite, but sort of in pairs. And so I did my coach training in 2008. And so I actually named it was my smallest character, but it's when I'm under stress, I become the witch. And the witch is intensely self-critical. But under, high pressure can also then become critical of the people around her, which I hate because I love the people around me. So, I have to like stop before I get to that point. Wow. But even like recently with promoting my book, one of my friends said to me, how's it going with all the, I was flying back and forth to LA and I was just like lots of kind of, deadlines to meet with certain like newspapers and things. And she said, how's it going? And I said, it's going fine, but I have become a control freak and a micromanager because that's what I do when I'm stressed. I still did it, but at least I knew and it was temporary.
Right, right.
And I apologized afterwards to my team.
But I think it's like, could be understanding what our default is.
Yeah.
Is really powerful. Yeah. Because you can interrupt it.
Yeah.
But I think it's like just that lack of awareness though, generally.
Exactly. I mean, obviously I know all the things that I know and I've worked on that for a very, very long time. And I've had like loads of amazing therapy and coaching and things. Yeah. But if you don't know that, can you imagine not being aware of that at all? And suddenly like your inner critic is like massively playing in your head.
Yeah.
You are, picking on the people around you that you love the most, that you are kind of like trying to control everything but you're not aware. I mean, we see that happen so much in coaching all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So final question, and I can't believe we've been going this long. That really flew by.
Feels like 10 minutes ago you were saying like, let's round out intuition.
I know. I love that you've been able to take us down this journey of manifestation and visualization. And I think they're such important features of the human experience. And I think they'll be kind of core features of the show. And I wonder, when you think about what's next for you and kind of what you're manifesting, what does that line look like?
Oh my goodness.
I just think there's so many big things happening for you right now. It's hard.
I know, but I'm going to be really brave and say the one that I'm probably the most scared of.
Okay.
Which is, it's only a couple of months ago that I appeared on Diary of a CEO for the second time. And Stephen really pushed me about finding love again. And I just said, I'm like absolutely not ready. And he sort of said, if I said to you that my partner died 4 years ago, what would you say to me? And I still wouldn't go there. This year, at the end of this month, Robin will have been dead for longer than we were married. Not longer than we were together, but longer than we were married. And that seems quite significant. I think I do need to put myself, be open to love again. And I have a few friends that have been in relationships with widows or widowers, and I know that can be really hard for the person. And I just hope that if and when that happens to me, that I can do that really gracefully.
Do you feel like your heart is ready and open?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it probably will take the right person.
That's really brave. I think you're going to attract someone into your life that is going to blow you away.
Oh,
I feel that. I feel that.
Thank you.
I don't know that there's really an alternative because you're so magnetic and
Oh,
beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I feel so hopeful. I absolutely loved the conversation. Tara needs literally no introduction. She is just an incredibly impressive neuroscientist, psychiatrist. She brings just an extraordinary depth of scientific rigor combined with just life experience, and she packages it all in a way that is so accessible. I learned so much from the conversation. We get into neuroplasticity, visualization, manifestation, intuition. I think a lot of her advice is how to make mindfulness a way of being in the world. And I think what's important is that her perspective on mindfulness, I think, is very different than I think the typical ways of thinking about mindfulness. And she breaks that down in just such a beautiful way. I just appreciate how she delivers science in ways that are really practical and accessible. And I know folks are going to just absolutely love hearing her perspective.